My husband went on vacation with his girl Bestie. So my fiancé Julian just texted me asking if we can meet for dinner tonight because he needs to discuss wedding expectations, and it's important. The same Julian who spent the last 6 weeks planning a month-long trip to Thailand with his female best friend Sienna, framing our upcoming marriage as him losing his freedom and needing one last adventure before settling down. Yeah, that Julian. I'm sitting here staring at my engagement ring wondering what fresh nightmare he's about to drop on me tonight, because if the last 6 weeks have taught me anything, it's that every conversation with him lately ends with me questioning my sanity. Because honestly, after listening to him quote Sienna's relationship wisdom like she's some kind of guru, after finding their secret text threads calling me jealous and controlling, after watching him book this entire escape with another woman 2 months before our wedding, I'm starting to think this dinner is going to be the breaking point. Let me explain how we got here because I need to process this before I walk into whatever he has planned for tonight. 6 weeks ago, Julian came home from Sunday brunch with Sienna and announced they'd been having a really important conversation about our future. His energy was weird, nervous but excited, like someone about to pitch an idea they know is controversial. I was folding wedding RSVPs at the dining table, checking off names of people who'd be watching us get married in just 2 months, when he sat down across from me with this serious expression. He said Sienna had opened his eyes to something he'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. That marriage is forever, and forever is a really long time. And before he committed to forever, he needed to make sure he knew who he was as an individual. Because once we got married, he'd be locked into family obligations and responsibilities and routines, and he'd never have another chance to just be spontaneous and free and himself. He needed one last trip before the wedding. 1 month in Thailand with Sienna, to find himself before he lost himself in marriage. I sat there with a stack of RSVPs in my hand, cards from people who'd already bought plane tickets and booked hotels to watch us promise forever to each other, and stared at him. I asked if this was a joke. He said no. He was completely serious. Sienna takes these freedom trips with all her friends before they get married, and she'd been explaining to him how crucial it is for his mental health and our future relationship. That the strongest marriages are between 2 people who know themselves as individuals first. I asked why he couldn't take a trip with his guy friends, or why we couldn't take a trip together before the wedding. He said his guy friends would just want to party and wouldn't give him space for real self-reflection. And taking a trip together would defeat the entire purpose. He needed distance from us to figure out if he was truly ready for us to become permanent. He needed to experience life without me to make sure he wanted life with me. The way he said it made our engagement sound like a mistake he needed to verify before it was too late. Like proposing had been impulsive and now he needed to check his work. When I pointed that out, he got defensive and said I was being dramatic. That engagement is just a promise, but marriage is legally binding, and it's actually really mature of him to want to make sure he's mentally prepared. That most people don't have the self-awareness to recognize their needs before it's too late. Over the next few weeks, the arguments were constant. Every conversation circled back to his trip. He'd already started planning with Sienna. I'd overhear their calls about temples and beaches and full moon parties. They had whole itineraries mapped out. When I'd try to talk to him about my concerns, he'd shut me down with therapy speak about how I was trying to control his autonomy. That my discomfort with his female friendships revealed my insecurities. That if I really trusted him, I wouldn't have a problem with this. He kept quoting Sienna like she was some enlightened relationship expert. Sienna says couples who give each other radical freedom have the strongest bonds. Sienna thinks people who need constant reassurance aren't ready for marriage. Sienna believes I need to explore this now or I'll resent you later. Every concern I raised, every boundary I tried to set, was met with something Sienna had apparently said about why I was wrong. I finally snapped and asked when Sienna became the authority on our relationship. She's been single for 3 years, has never even lived with a partner, never been engaged. What qualified her to give advice about marriage? Julian got this pitying look on his face and said that's exactly why her perspective was valuable. She wasn't emotionally compromised like I was. She could see our relationship objectively while I was too close to it, too invested in the wedding to think clearly about the marriage, too invested in the wedding, our wedding, that we'd been planning together for 8 months. Suddenly that was a character flaw. Then I found the messages. I wasn't snooping. Julian left his iPad open on the kitchen counter and the messaging app was right there. Months of conversations between him and Sienna that made my blood run cold. Her pushing and pushing. Are you sure she's the one? You're only 29. You have your whole life ahead of you. She seems very focused on the wedding, but is she focused on your happiness? Marriage is forever. You need to be absolutely certain. And Julian responding, sometimes I wonder if I'm settling. What if I'm just doing this because it's what's expected? I love her, but is that enough? You're right, I need to really think about this. The worst message was from 3 weeks ago. Sienna wrote, if she really loves you, she'll support this trip. If she fights you on it, you'll know she's more interested in controlling you than understanding you. Julian responded, you're right. This will be a good test of whether she's ready to be a wife. A test. Our relationship 2 months before the wedding was a test designed by another woman. When I confronted him about the messages, He didn't apologize. He said I'd invaded his privacy and that me snooping proved Sienna's point about my trust issues. I told him I didn't have trust issues. I had a fiancé planning to leave me for a month with another woman issues. He said I was being dramatic and manipulative, twisting things to make him the villain when he was just trying to be honest about his needs. Every feeling I expressed got reframed as a personality defect. I was controlling, insecure, not ready for marriage, too focused on the wedding, too emotional, too reactive. According to Julian, I was basically a walking collection of red flags that he was generously trying to work through because he loved me despite my flaws. Last week, he officially announced he was going through with it. He'd bought plane tickets, booked accommodations, planned the whole thing with Sienna. 5 weeks in Thailand and Bali. It had grown from 4 weeks without him even telling me. Leaving in 2 weeks, getting back 1 week before the wedding. When I asked how he could make such a massive decision without my input, he said he had considered my input, but ultimately his mental health had to come first. That he couldn't start our marriage already feeling resentful about missing this opportunity. I asked if he understood how insulting it was that marrying me required a month-long escape first. He said I was twisting his words again. This wasn't about escaping me. It was about finding himself. And the fact that I couldn't see the difference proved exactly why he needed the space. Every conversation ended the same way, with me somehow being the problem. My concerns were invalid. My feelings were irrational. My boundaries were controlling. And through it all, Sienna's voice in his ear, telling him he was right and I was wrong, that he deserved this, and I was being selfish. So here we are. 6 weeks of fighting, 6 weeks of being gaslit, 6 weeks of watching my fiancé plan an escape from our marriage before it even starts. And now he wants dinner to discuss wedding expectations. Part of me stupidly hopes maybe he's finally coming to his senses, that maybe the man I fell in love with will show up tonight and we can salvage this. But a much bigger part of me knows exactly what this is. He's going to announce he's going regardless of how I feel, probably with a whole speech prepared about what I need to work on while he's gone. Well, I'm done being the accommodating fiancé. Time to hear what he has to say. Update coming after dinner. First update. I'm sitting in my car in the parking lot of the restaurant right now, and I honestly can't decide if I want to laugh or scream. So remember how Julian wanted to meet for dinner to discuss wedding expectations? Well, buckle up because this man just revealed exactly how little he thinks of me, our relationship, and apparently women in general. And I'm genuinely questioning every decision I've made in the last 2 years. I got to the restaurant early and spent 15 minutes giving myself a pep talk. Part of me was still hoping this would be the moment he'd realize how insane he'd been acting, that maybe he'd come to his senses and we could salvage this. I should have known better. Julian walked in with this confident energy that immediately set me on edge. He kissed my cheek like everything was normal, sat down, and ordered us a bottle of wine like we were celebrating something. When the waiter left, I asked him straight up what this dinner was about. He leaned back in his chair and said he'd been reflecting a lot on our relationship and our upcoming marriage. I was nervous because his tone was giving the therapist explaining things to difficult patients. He said that our recent disagreements about his trip had revealed some concerning patterns in my thinking that he felt we needed to address before moving forward with the wedding. I asked what patterns he was talking about. He actually had the audacity to pull out his phone and show me notes, like he'd written down a list of my character flaws. He started with how I'd reacted emotionally instead of rationally to his trip announcement, how I'd made his needs about my insecurities instead of supporting his personal growth, how I seemed more focused on the wedding than the marriage, which worried him about my priorities. Every point felt like a punch to the gut, but I stayed quiet and let him talk because I needed to hear exactly how deep this went. Then he got to the real point of the dinner. He said he'd decided, not discussed, not asked, that he's going on the trip regardless of my feelings about it, that he can't let my discomfort dictate his choices, or he'll end up resenting me for the rest of our marriage. He said this like he was being noble, like he was doing us both a favor by establishing boundaries before we said our vows. I asked if he understood that most people would consider planning a month-long vacation with another woman 2 months before their wedding to be a massive red flag, not a boundary. He said that's exactly the kind of conventional thinking that stifles relationships. But wait, it gets so much better. He then launched into what he'd planned for me while he was gone. He said, and I'm quoting here because I'll never forget these words, "I think you should use this time to really focus on preparing for your role as my wife." I asked him what he meant by that, and he actually smiled like he was about to give me helpful advice. He said that since I'd been so focused on my career, I hadn't really thought about the domestic side of marriage, that his mom had mentioned I didn't know how to make his favorite meals, and maybe I could take some cooking classes, that I could use the time to practice making our house more of a home instead of just a place we sleep. I sat there in complete shock as he kept going. He said marriage would require me to shift my priorities a bit, maybe consider going part-time at work eventually, so I could focus more on our home life and future family. That Sienna had really opened his eyes to how important it is for wives to support their husbands' ambitions instead of competing with them. That the strongest marriages have clear roles and expectations, and he wanted to establish that now before we made things official. I finally found my voice and asked if he was seriously telling me I needed to become a 1950s housewife while he went on vacation with another woman. He got this frustrated look and said I was twisting his words, that he just wanted me to understand that marriage requires sacrifice and compromise, and right now he wasn't seeing much willingness to compromise from my end. I pointed out that I'd been compromising our entire relationship while he demanded I accept increasingly disrespectful behavior. He said that's exactly what he meant about my attitude. I saw support as disrespect, which revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of partnership. Then came the line that made me realize I was talking to a stranger. He said, and I quote, "Supportive wives don't question their husband's female friendships. If you can't handle me having close women friends, you're not ready for marriage. Part of being a wife is trusting your husband completely and not creating drama where none exists." I asked him how he'd feel if the roles were reversed, if I announced I was taking a month-long trip with a male friend 2 months before our wedding, told him to use the time to work on being a better husband, and suggested he go part-time at work to support my career better. The look on his face was everything I needed to see. For just a second, his mask slipped, and I saw pure outrage at the idea of me doing exactly what he was demanding I accept from him. But he caught himself quickly and said that would be different because men and women have different relationship needs. That women are naturally more nurturing and home-focused, while men need more freedom and independence. That comparing our situations wasn't fair, because the dynamics are fundamentally different. I told him that was the most sexist thing I'd ever heard him say. He said it wasn't sexist, it was biological reality, and the fact that I was offended by basic gender differences showed how influenced I'd been by modern feminist nonsense that was destroying healthy relationships. I couldn't even respond to that. I just sat there staring at this man I'd agreed to marry, wondering when he'd become this person, or if he'd always been this way, and I'd just been too blind to see it. He took my silence as agreement and kept going. He laid out exactly what he expected from the next 2 weeks before he left. I'd stop complaining about his trip. I'd work on my domestic skills and my attitude. I'd think seriously about my career trajectory and how it would fit into our marriage. And I'd apologize to Sienna for being unwelcoming and hostile toward his friendship with her. Apologize to Sienna, the woman who'd been poisoning my relationship for months. The woman who'd convinced my fiancé that I was the problem. I asked if he was joking. He said he was completely serious, that Sienna had been nothing but supportive of our relationship, and I'd treated her terribly just because I was jealous and insecure. That part of growing up and being ready for marriage meant acknowledging when you're wrong and making amends. I asked about the logistics of our relationship while he was gone. Would we talk every day? Would I be involved in any decisions about the wedding? What was the plan? He got uncomfortable and started hedging. Said he couldn't promise daily communication because he needed true separation to really think. Said I should handle the wedding details myself since I clearly cared about them more than he did anyway. Said he'd need flexibility and couldn't commit to specific check-ins because that defeated the purpose of freedom. Then I asked if Sienna would be comfortable with me visiting if I decided to fly out and surprise him. The way he immediately said no told me everything. He stumbled through some excuse about how Sienna wasn't comfortable with me because of how I'd reacted to their friendship, and that bringing that energy into their trip would ruin the whole experience for both of them. So let me get this straight. My fiancé was going on a month-long vacation with a woman who specifically didn't want me around, and somehow I was the problem. I sat back and really looked at him, at this man who was supposed to be my partner, my equal, my future, and all I saw was someone who wanted a maid and a cheerleader, not a wife. Someone who'd rather listen to another woman than respect his fiancé. Someone who thought marriage meant I'd lose myself while he gained freedom. I asked him one last question. Do you even want to marry me? He looked offended and said of course he did. That's why he was trying to work through these issues now. I said it seemed like he wanted to marry a version of me that didn't exist. Someone who'd happily stay home and cook while he traveled the world. Someone who'd never question him or have needs of her own. Someone who'd put his freedom above her own dignity. He said I was being dramatic again, and that this was exactly why he needed this trip, to get clarity on whether I was capable of being the partner he needed. By the time we left that restaurant, he'd made it crystal clear. He was going on this trip in 2 weeks. I was expected to spend the time working on myself. And when he got back, we'd reevaluate whether I'd grown enough to deserve to marry him. Like I should be grateful he was willing to give me a second chance to prove myself worthy. I'm sitting in my car trying to process what just happened. But honestly, I'm not sad. I'm furious. While Julian was busy explaining all the ways I need to change and listing his expectations for what kind of wife I should become, I was making some realizations of my own. He wants freedom? He wants someone to show him what a supportive partner looks like? Well, I'm about to give him a masterclass in both. Tomorrow I'm making some calls and booking some trips of my own. If Julian thinks I'm going to sit at home taking cooking classes and working on my wifely duties while he parties in Thailand with Sienna, he's about to learn exactly how wrong he is. 2 weeks until his trip? Perfect. That gives me 2 weeks to plan mine. The gloves are off. Update coming soon. Second update. You guys, I am having the time of my life right now, and watching Julian's carefully planned manipulation blow up in his face is giving me so much joy. If he wanted to test my boundaries and see how much disrespect I'd tolerate, well, he's about to find out I'm much better at this game than he ever imagined. So the morning after that disaster dinner, I woke up with complete clarity. I wasn't going to argue, I wasn't going to beg, I wasn't going to give him the emotional reaction he was expecting. Instead, I started making some calls. First call was to my boss explaining I needed to use 3 weeks of vacation time starting in 2 weeks. She was surprised but supportive. Second call was to the best travel agent I could find. Third call was to book the trip of a lifetime to Greece, Santorini, Mykonos, and Crete. Solo female adventure, leaving the exact same day as Julian's Thailand trip. When Julian texted me that afternoon saying he was starting to pack and asking if I'd had time to think about what we discussed, I responded with the sweetest message. I have. I've actually been thinking a lot about freedom and personal growth. I'm so glad we had that conversation. He called immediately, probably confused by my tone. I answered cheerfully and told him I'd done some reflecting and realized he was right. We both needed space to figure out who we are as individuals. So I'd booked myself a 3-week trip to Greece, leaving the same day as his Thailand adventure. The silence on the other end was absolutely golden. Then he started sputtering about the wedding planning and vendor meetings and dress fittings. I reminded him sweetly that he'd said I was too focused on wedding details and should focus more on personal growth. So I was taking his advice. The confusion in his voice was delicious. He asked who I was going with, and I said I was going solo, just like he'd taught me about the importance of independence and freedom in relationships. He said that was different because I had responsibilities at home. I asked what responsibilities. The cooking classes he'd suggested. I could learn to make moussaka in Greece just as easily as his mom's pot roast here. By the time we hung up, he was clearly unsettled, but couldn't argue because I was literally doing exactly what he'd told me to do, just not in the way he'd imagined. That evening, I posted my plane tickets to Instagram. Some people get pre-wedding anxiety. I'm getting pre-wedding adventures. Sometimes the best marriages start with 2 people who truly know themselves. Julian called within minutes. What is this supposed to mean? I told him I was just being supportive of his philosophy about freedom before marriage, that I'd realized he was right about needing space to grow individually. The frustration in his voice when he couldn't quite call me out without being a hypocrite was chef's kiss perfect. The next 2 weeks were gold. Julian kept sending me updates about his packing like I was supposed to care. Photos of his suitcase, his new travel backpack, questions about whether he should bring his nice shoes. I responded to each one with increasingly pointed comments. Make sure to pack sunscreen for those beach clubs with Sienna. And don't forget nice outfits for all those sunset dinners. He couldn't tell if I was being supportive or sarcastic, and it was driving him insane. Then the departure day came. Julian and I both left for the airport. Him for Bangkok, me for Athens. The look on his face when he saw my packed bags was priceless. He'd clearly hoped I'd come around and see him off like a good little fiancé. Instead, I was calling my own ride, bright-eyed and excited for my own adventure. The first 2 days, I posted gorgeous content from Santorini. White buildings against blue sky, incredible sunsets, wine tasting, exploring villages. Meanwhile, Julian was posting typical tourist stuff. Temples, street markets, him and Sienna making goofy faces at the camera. Then on day 3, everything shifted. Julian's posts turned into full-on beach club party content. And Sienna was in almost every photo wearing almost nothing. Photos of Sienna in a tiny red bikini at an infinity pool, both of them holding cocktails. Sienna in a neon pink string bikini on a boat. Beach club pictures where she was practically draped over him in a barely there white swimsuit. Pool party shots, her in different bikinis every day. Orange, yellow, black, each one more revealing than the last. My best friend Mara was screenshotting everything and sending it to me with skull emojis. Is he serious right now? She's basically in lingerie in half these photos. And he was worried about you learning to cook moussaka with a local chef? One particularly memorable post showed them at a rooftop bar at sunset. Sienna in a black bikini with a sheer sarong, leaning against him while they watched the view. Caption: living our best lives. Another showed her in a leopard print bikini lying on a beach daybed next to him. Then came the one that made Mara lose it. Sienna in his hotel bathrobe on their balcony, coffee cup in hand. Caption: room service breakfast just hits different when you're living freely. But I didn't comment on his posts. I was too busy actually living my best life. On day 3 in Santorini, I wandered into this family-owned restaurant overlooking the caldera. The owner's grandson, Nico, took my order. We started talking, and I ended up staying for hours, talking to him and his grandmother, Yaya Katerina, about the island, about food, about life. He offered to show me some hidden spots the tourists never see. Over the next few days, Nico became my guide and my friend. We explored hidden beaches. He taught me to cook traditional dishes in his grandmother's kitchen. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. And I started posting about it, but tastefully. Photos of the cooking lessons, beautiful scenery, moments with Yaya Katerina, everything real and authentic and fully clothed, unlike the softcore resort wear catalog Julian was posting. The contrast was stark. His posts looked like a spring break MTV special. More beach clubs, Sienna in a yellow bikini that was basically 3 triangles in string, them at beach bars with her sitting practically in his lap, her in a white crochet bikini that left nothing to imagination. Mine looked like a life-changing cultural experience. Sunset cooking sessions, village explorations, genuine connections. And Julian noticed. His text started getting concerned. Who's that guy in your stories? Are you hanging out with locals? Why aren't you answering your phone? I'd respond hours later with breezy messages. Having an amazing time. Thought we were both enjoying our freedom. Meanwhile, his posts with Sienna kept getting more provocative. Sienna in a metallic gold bikini at another beach club. Beach volleyball in barely there bottoms. A particularly egregious post of them at a full moon party. Her in body paint and a bikini top. Him with his arm around her. The internet was forever, and he was documenting all of it. Mara sent that one with, "I'm sorry, body paint?" And he's got his arm around her. And he questioned you about making pasticcio with a Greek grandmother? But the best part was watching Julian spiral. By week 2, his texts had gone from concerned to panicked. We need to talk about boundaries. I don't think it's appropriate for you to be spending so much time with some random guy. Are you even thinking about our wedding? I reminded him that he'd spent 6 weeks telling me that opposite-sex friendships were perfectly normal and that anyone who had a problem with them was insecure. That I was just being mature and trusting, like he'd asked me to be. The hypocrisy was so blatant he couldn't even argue back. Meanwhile, I was genuinely falling for this new life. Nico was kind and funny and treated me like an equal. We'd spend mornings at the beach, afternoons cooking with Yaya Katerina, evenings watching sunsets and talking about our dreams. There was no pressure, no games, no tests, just 2 people enjoying each other's company and seeing where it went. My posts reflected that. Genuine joy, real laughter, authentic experiences. His posts were still party-focused, but there was something desperate about them now. More beach clubs, Sienna in a blue sequined bikini, more bikini shots, red string bikini at sunset, but the captions were getting defensive. Living without apologies, and some people understand freedom, some people don't. By the end of week 2, Julian was trying to video call me multiple times a day. I'd decline and text back that I was busy or that the connection wasn't good. The few times I did answer, I kept it short and sweet. Yes, I was having an amazing time. Yes, Nico was wonderful. Yes, I was learning so much about myself. And then I'd have to go because we were heading to another beach or another family dinner or another adventure. His last string of posts before everything fell apart were almost sad. More full moon party content. Sienna in neon body paint and a bikini top. Different angles of the same party. Him trying to look like he was having the time of his life. But I could see the cracks. The forced smiles. The try-hard captions. Then on Sunday of week 3, the messages got desperate. We need to talk immediately. Something happened with Sienna. I want to come home early. This trip was a mistake, but I was too busy being happy to care. I was at a beach bonfire with Nico and his friends, watching the sunset, speaking broken Greek and laughing at my mistakes, eating amazing food, feeling more myself than I had in years. Some people plan freedom trips to test their partners, but some people discover that real freedom has nothing to do with tests or trips or proving points. It's about choosing yourself and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Julian's about to find out that while he was busy posting bikini pics with his friend, I was busy falling in love with an actual life worth living. Update coming soon. Last update. I literally cannot stop smiling at what just happened. Julian video called me and completely melted down on camera, and honestly, it was exactly what he deserved. So after 3 weeks of increasingly panicked messages from Julian about needing to talk and how things went wrong with Sienna, I finally answered his video call. I was at Nico's family restaurant during golden hour, the sun setting over the Mediterranean behind me, and I looked genuinely happy because I was genuinely happy. Julian, on the other hand, was calling from some dingy hostel in Bangkok looking absolutely wrecked. He immediately launched into this whole sob story about how Sienna had met some Australian guy named Dylan and ditched him over a week ago, how he'd been alone in Thailand, how the trip wasn't what he'd expected, how he wanted to come home early and work on us. He looked like he'd been sleeping in his clothes, and I felt absolutely nothing but relief that I hadn't wasted more time on him. I calmly told him, "I'm not coming home, Julian." His face went through about 5 emotions in 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, panic. "What do you mean you're not coming home? Your trip is almost over. I'm staying in Greece, with Nico, and the wedding is off." The explosion was immediate. "Over some vacation fling? You're throwing away our entire relationship for some guy you just met?" I stayed completely calm, which seemed to make him angrier. "You threw it away when you told me marrying you meant losing your freedom. Turns out I was the one trapped. Greece didn't just give me freedom, Julian. It gave me clarity." He started sputtering about how we could work through this, how his trip was a mistake, how he'd been wrong. I cut him off. I've spent 3 weeks with someone who treats me as an equal, who doesn't think supporting me means silencing myself, who doesn't need to run away to another country with another woman to figure out if he wants me. The contrast is pretty stark. That's when he shifted to anger. Started yelling about how I was being vindictive and irrational, how I was throwing away 2 years over nothing, how I'd planned this whole thing to hurt him. I reminded him that he'd literally told me to work on myself while he was gone. So I did. I worked on remembering what it felt like to be valued. And you know what's funny, Julian? I've been more productive working remotely from Greece than I ever was listening to you tell me I should go part-time. Turns out I didn't need to sacrifice my career. I needed to leave you. He completely lost it then, screaming about how Nico was probably just using me, how I was being naive, how I'd regret this, all while looking like he hadn't showered in days, sitting in a hostel bed, alone because his best friend had abandoned him. Speaking of using people, I said sweetly, how's Sienna? Oh wait, she left you for Dylan. Or did she? Because I'm curious, Julian, does Dylan even exist? The look on his face told me my suspicion was right. There was something he wasn't saying about Sienna's disappearance, but I didn't need to know the details. I just needed to be done. Here's what's going to happen, I said calmly. You're going to handle canceling all the wedding vendors. You're going to tell everyone why the wedding is off. And you're going to leave me alone to live my life. He tried one last manipulation. Get over yourself, Isla. I'm giving you one last chance to stop being ridiculous before we're done. I actually laughed. Julian, we've been done since you told me to learn to cook while you partied with another woman in bikinis. I just needed 3 weeks in Greece to remember what I deserve. And it's not this. While you were posting thirst traps with Sienna at beach clubs, I was building something real. While you were testing my loyalty, I was discovering I deserve someone who never makes me prove my worth. While you were finding yourself, I was finding someone who never made me feel lost. I could see movement in the background of his video. Good. Let whoever was there hear this. Enjoy explaining to everyone how you threw away your fiancé for a freedom trip, how you chose your single friend's advice over your partner, how you posted bikini photos with another woman 2 months before your wedding and then got mad when I actually took your advice about independence. Then I hung up while he was still trying to respond, blocked his number, turned to Nico, who'd been pretending not to watch from across the restaurant. He came over and I kissed him, properly, for the first time. And it felt like coming home in a way my actual home never had. My phone exploded with messages from friends and family after Julian apparently started calling people to tell his version of the story. But Mara had already been group texting everyone screenshots of his bikini-filled Thailand posts and my message about him wanting me to learn to be domestic while he was gone. The support was overwhelming. 3 days later, Mara sent me the tea I'd been waiting for. Sienna wasn't some innocent friend. She was a con artist who'd been running a long game. There was no Dylan. She'd drained Julian's bank account, maxed out his credit cards, and stolen his passport before disappearing. He'd been stranded in Bangkok for 2 weeks, had to call his parents for emergency money to get home. The police report Mara found online revealed Sienna had done this to multiple men. Fake identity, fake friendship, real theft. Julian had literally thrown away our relationship for a scammer who saw him coming from a mile away. I sent Mara back. He really threw away a real woman for a literal criminal? The universe has a sense of humor, Mara added. And all those bikini photos are still up. The internet is forever. Everyone can see him draped all over a known scammer. Apparently Julian's parents had asked about me, devastated they'd lost me as a future daughter-in-law. His mom had told Mara I was the best thing that ever happened to him. But I was already gone, already building a new life. 3 months later, mutual friends reported Julian was back home living with his parents, broke, trying to rebuild his credit, and dealing with the humiliation of everyone knowing he got scammed by his best friend. 6 months later, I'm still in Greece. Extended my visa, working remotely for my company, helping out at Nico's family restaurant when I can, learning Greek from Yaya Katerina, cooking family recipes, integrated into village life. I'm happy in a way I didn't know was possible. My last Instagram post was simple. A photo of me and Nico at a beach bonfire. Genuine laughter, surrounded by friends. Caption, chose freedom. Found myself. Never settling again. Mara commented. From almost bride to Greek island goddess. This is what choosing yourself looks like. To anyone dealing with someone who thinks they can test you, manipulate you, or make you smaller to fit their vision, don't argue. Don't beg. Just choose yourself and watch them realize too late what they lost. Julian wanted freedom. He got it. Just not the kind he imagined. And I got something better. A life where I'm valued, respected, and truly free. Living well really is the best revenge.